Do. Hi, it's Mignon Fogarty with Behind the Grammar number 22. I got good feedback and bad feedback last week about doing video. Some of you thought it was great and you loved having something to watch, and other people thought, just a talking head didn't add very much, and other people listen while they do something where they shouldn't be watching, like driving. So I am going to try to do a better job using the medium and showing you pictures of things I'm talking about. And I'm also going to separate the feed into audio and video, two separate shows, so you can get whichever format you prefer. That'll take a couple of weeks because I have some administrative stuff I have to do to make it happen, but it will be coming. It's been a rough week for Jonathan Franzen, the author of the book you can't stop hearing about, Freedom. First, a drunk graduate student stole his glasses right off his face at a book launch party, and then it was announced that his British publisher had released 8,000 copies of his book that were based on an old manuscript. It wasn't the final version, so the book went out with anywhere from dozens to hundreds of errors. I'm sure that is a nightmare for everyone involved. And the worst thing is that in an article in The Guardian, Rare booksellers said that because so many went out, it didn't even make them valuable as collector's items. There's too many on the street. Bummer. I love Scrabble, and I'm intrigued by e-readers. So I was interested to hear that the Kindle came out with a Scrabble game you could play on the Kindle. But it sounds like the Kindle is no iPad. It sounds pretty clunky because the Kindle doesn't have a touch screen. You have to use the keys to navigate around the board. And if you want to play with someone else, you have to hand the Kindle back and forth. But still, this is the third game to come out for the Kindle, and when I checked just now, it was #1. It was the #1 seller in the Kindle bookstore. So I wonder if they're going to have to stop calling it the bookstore and just call it the store now that they have games available. Kind of interesting. And there was an interesting Nielsen study this week comparing demographics between people who own a Kindle and people who own an iPad. It turns out iPad owners were much more likely to be men than Kindle owners. 65% of iPad owners are male, whereas only 52% of Kindle owners are male. iPad owners are also slightly younger than Kindle owners, and even though the iPad is much more expensive than the Kindle, Kindle owners earn more money. But the good news for now, at least, is that also in the same Nielsen study, iPad owners said they were very receptive to advertising. They were likely to buy products they saw and just were very receptive to advertising they saw on their iPad. So good news for advertisers. Here's a fun diversion, a literary map of Manhattan. It looks as if it might be from 2005, but I hadn't seen it before, so maybe you haven't either. It was brought to my attention by LJ Thornton on Twitter, so thanks to her for tweeting about it. It shows where New Yorkers found in literature lived and worked, not the actual authors, but the characters in the books. For example, you move the red box over Manhattan to zoom in, and then click on the numbers. Here you see that Harriet the Spy lived on East 87th Street. It's a fun way to kill some time and feel like you're learning something. Merriam-Webster's been jazzing up their website quite a bit over the last year or so. Well, I just discovered that they also have top 10 lists. This week they have the top 10 words that came from brand names. The first one is heroin. Who knew that heroin came from a drug sold in the late 1800s by Bayer? The word heroin comes from a German word that means powerful. Little did they know. And just to be clear, heroin the drug is spelled without the E. Heroine, the woman who saves the day in your novel, that's spelled with an E. You can remember that by thinking the heroine in your novel, she has that little extra something that makes everyone love her and makes her always get to the emergency on time. Well, that little extra something could be the extra E on the end. Heroine with an E. Visit the Merriam-Webster website to see the other 9 words in their list. I'll put a link in the show notes. The New Yorker is having their Critterati photo test again this year. This is great. They want to see photos of your pets dressed up like literary figures. Will your dog be the next Aslan? Photos are judged on creativity, resemblance to the character, cleverness, and originality. Up to 5 winners will win a copy of the book Photo Booth Dogs by Cameron Wu. This has been a sad, kind of weird week for me because one of my good friends from high school died unexpectedly. And I hadn't been in touch with her for years, but because of Facebook, we had exchanged a few messages recently, and I followed her on Facebook, and so I kind of felt like I knew what was going on in her life. And it was weird that she was gone. And if it weren't for Facebook, I probably wouldn't have known that she died. But I was really glad that I did. But you know, it got me thinking, social media is really strange. I mean, I keep in touch with so many more people than I used to. I mean, I probably, you know, I'm in relatively close touch with 50 to 100 more people than I was before Twitter or Facebook, and I casually follow thousands of people. So actually just last week, in addition to my good old friend, I heard about 3 other people who had died, or one who was just very seriously ill. And you know, it gets you thinking about life, and it does make me think more about, am I doing what I want to be with my life? And I start thinking about, you know, my legacy. What would I leave behind? I've also thought, like, what happens to your accounts after you die? It turns out Facebook has a form you can fill out to say someone has died. You have to show proof that they're dead somehow, and then Facebook changes their account a bit. They say it removes certain sensitive information and sets privacy so that only confirmed friends can see the profile or locate it in a search. Time magazine reported in 2009 that as part of what they call memorializing a Facebook account, the account is sealed from future login attempts. And apparently families can also request that the profile be taken down. But Facebook won't give passwords to families. So, another thing memorializing does is it keeps that person's profile from coming up under the part where Facebook suggests you reconnect with someone, which is a really good idea because that could be awfully upsetting to see a dead friend being suggested as someone you reconnect with. I remember hearing that there are services that where you can store your passwords for your family to get them after you die. And the Time magazine article had a link to that information. So 3 of the companies are Legacy Locker, Asset Lock, and Death Switch. November is National Novel Writing Month, and the fine folks at NaNoWriMo want you to get off the dime and write a novel. NaNoWriMo is a website and organization that encourages people to write a novel in the month of November. It's simple. Join thousands of other people, start writing your novel November 1st, and finish by midnight November 30th. And the goal is to write 50,000 words. As their website says, quote, "It's all about quantity, not quality. The kamikaze approach forces you to lower your expectations, take risks, and write on the fly," end quote. The goal is to show that you can complete a novel in a month because the idea of doing something so big is a barrier to a lot of people. So if you just sit down every day and write and just create this novel that you kind of know going in isn't going to be fantastic, just getting through that shows you that you can keep to a writing schedule and that you can write something that big. That's the general goal. So over 23,000 people have already signed up, and you can join them by visiting nanowrimo.org. And I can't believe November is so soon, but before that even is Blog World in the middle of October. I will be at Blog World in Las Vegas, and I'll be speaking on Friday, October 15th. I'll be speaking with Jeff Powers from Geekazine about the advantages of producing evergreen content. And I'll also be on a panel later that afternoon where we'll be critiquing podcasts, helping people see how they can make their podcasts better. This week I started reading The Glamour of Grammar by Roy Peter Clark. He is a senior scholar at the Poynter Institute, which is one of the most prestigious schools for journalism in the world, according to the book jacket, but I believe them. I've heard of it. I'm sure you have too. So I love that it has a semicolon on the cover. I love that it's orange. But most of all, I love Roy's writing style. It's fun and conversational. The book is definitely for word lovers. It's not a usage guide or a style guide. So, but you're reading along with his great anecdotes and stories about how he grew up and how he was using language, how he's seen language being used. It's very engaging storytelling, and you'll also pick up a lot of fun tidbits about language along the way. It's been out for, gosh, at least a few weeks, maybe a month. It's doing really well. Everyone loves it. So, The Glamour of Grammar by Roy Peter Clarke. I recommend it. Last week, I talked about how the Espresso book machine is getting more traction in bookstores. Well, Dave Farland, who writes the Daily Kick email newsletter, which I love, has a different take on the print-on-demand books. It's quite interesting. So he thinks that the market for print-on-demand books will be quite limited because ebooks are taking that role. And it makes sense. So the promise of print-on-demand was always that it would make out-of-print books or rare books easier to get. But now that's what ebooks are for, right? So it kind of makes sense. He did highlight another interesting point, though. Apparently, authors have been worried that by having their book in a print-on-demand database, that authors could keep their book in print forever, therefore keeping the rights forever. When a book goes out of print, the rights can revert back to the author. But if those books are in a database for a print-on-demand machine, does that mean that it's actually still in print legally? Well, Dave said that, quote, "In the past couple of weeks, judges have ruled that electronic publication of a book is not publication since it doesn't create a physical book. This means that publishers can't pay a royalty on electronic books, but instead have to pay a licensing fee for the use of electronic rights. The same concept will apply to print-on-demand books." As an aside, I cannot recommend Dave's email newsletter, The Daily Kick in the Pants, highly enough. It's excellent. He occasionally talks about the business of publishing, things like this ebook contract and print-on-demand stuff, but his email newsletter in general is about fiction writing, and his tips are practical and insightful, and I look forward to them every day. So it's Dave Farland's Daily Kick in the Pants, and I'll put a link in the show notes. That's all for this week. You can find links to almost everything I talked about at BehindTheGrammar.com. And I'm Mignon Fogarty, author of The Grammar Devotional. Buy a copy and I'll earn an iced tea at a fast food restaurant.